Valley Live presents Path to the Show with Prospects Live.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Path to the Show on Valley Live and Stadium. What we're doing is breaking down the top 10 prospects in each Major League Baseball franchise, one team at a time, 10 players at a time. And we are the Prospects Live guys, here to lead you through the top 10. I am Drew Wheeler, a fantasy baseball writer, podcaster, and personality with Prospects Live. And with me is our director of pro scouting, your friend and mine, Reese White. Reese, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. I can't wait to talk about the team we're talking about today. I'm excited to see, I think it's a good system, and I think I'm just excited to talk with you as I always am.
Likewise, it's always nice to talk with you, my friend. The Baltimore Orioles. Reese, as you well know, at Prospects Live, what we try to do is marry every facet of baseball, whether it's live looks, analysis, stats, fantasy, to provide you with the best possible baseball coverage in the entire interweb and through the scope of any kind of information you can get. We're doing our best to bring that to you. So if you haven't, check out our website and our Patreon. Consider subscribing, and we're happy to tell you anything else that you may want to know about that. But the Orioles, the topic of discussion today. So let's really quickly talk about the Orioles season. 91-71 for Baltimore this season. They were swept in the AL wild card round. They haven't made it out of that round in 2 straight seasons, Reese. Even with some of the best young talent in baseball, hard not to be a little disappointed if you're a fan in Birdland, right?
No, it's hard not to be disappointed. I think they have one of the more exciting young cores in baseball. They've graduated prospects at a rate that we really haven't seen since. Ooh, you want to say like the Cubs sort of core, like, that sort of like core that people think is going to maybe lead to something. And ultimately, I think the Orioles just, they haven't had enough pitching, like, and their hitters are developing at a slower, there's some elite guys in this team, but there's also some guys who took a little bit of a step back. And also there's guys who didn't develop at the major league level the way we kind of hoped so, with Jackson Holliday, who's no longer a prospect. We're not going to be talking about him, but his intro to the highest level of baseball is it's a mixed bag is the nicest way to put it. And then you have obviously one of the best hitters who didn't even get considered for the MVP in Gunnar Henderson, and then Adley Rutschman sort of had a down year. It's a rough time. Like if you had really high expectations for Baltimore, like I kind of did, it's a little bit. I don't know the best way to describe it. It's just things didn't go the way that they wanted.
Yeah. Didn't all the chips didn't quite fall where they needed them to, and you actually made a great point a minute ago. There just wasn't quite enough pitching there. So I know that we're in the middle of the offseason. The free agent hot stove is going on coals, but it's starting to gain some traction. I'm curious. You would say that the primary thing that the Orioles need to address is pitching, starting pitching, particularly whether it's through trades or through free agency, right?
Yeah, they are a team that really needs to be aggressive in either the trade market or the free agent market, or preferably with this new ownership that stepped in, both. They can sprinkle some old base seasoning on everything and kind of fix this rotation that kind of needs a lot of help. When Zach Eflin is your projected number one on roster resource and you're a team that has championship aspirations, I don't think that's the way that we should be going. I think they need to be in on Corbin Burns, bring him back. He knows what it's like to pitch there. He's a volatile player, but he is one of the best pitchers in baseball. They need to be in the Garrett Crochet market. They have the resources that we'll talk about later to make that sort of trade. So they need to be aggressive in this pitching landscape.
I couldn't agree more with you, man. I think I've got to ask because we're going to talk about guys for their farm system teams. Talking AAA, we've got the Norfolk Tides, 69 wins, they missed the playoffs. The AA Bowie Bay Sox, 62 wins, missed the playoffs. High A Aberdeen Ironbirds, 67 wins, missed the playoffs. Single A Delmarva Shorebirds, 53 wins, missed the playoffs. One quick question for you, Reese. With all these promotions, with some trades, do the Orioles have a weak farm system now? Could it be?
They do have a weaker farm system. We're so used to them being at the top. I mean, I've made the joke on social media that Mike Elias is very concerned about having the number one farm system in baseball. Now they're not in contention for that. They're still a middle of the pack, sort of 10 to 20 prospect, collection of prospects. But, it's for all the right reasons. They traded away prospects. They traded away Joey Ortiz, DL Hall to get Corbin Burns. They've graduated they're hopefully their catcher of the future who takes or catcher of the present and the future, and hopefully takes like a little bit of a bounce back. And Adley Rushman, he's too good to have the season that he had this past season. Gunnar Henderson is one of the best shortstops in baseball. Jackson Holliday is on his path to being one of the best second basemen in baseball. He just needs to make a couple adjustments, and I trust that he will. It's a weaker farm system while still having some star power at the top. It doesn't have the depth in it that it used to have.
That's totally fair. I think that the key thing is they're making trades, they're weakening the system for the right reasons. And it's not as if this is a San Diego Padres type of operation right here either. Their system was traded from repeatedly and now is it fair to call it very weak?
Yeah, we're talking about the Orioles, right? Their farm system is very weak.
Yeah, the
Or the
Padres
Padres.
though specifically, their system is weaker than the Orioles, and so the Orioles have at least some of that upper level buoyancy that other orgs would probably still be really happy to have, right?
Oh yeah, the Padres are the ultimate pump and dump sort of scheme going on with their prospects, right? Like they develop them and then they trade them, which is ultimately good teams do that. Like AJ Preller
Sure.
and Padres, for example, and not to talk too much about the Padres, because we're here to talk about the Orioles, but they are one of the best at trading in the entire game. They do a really good job of that, and I think that's one of the things that the Orioles need to focus on is they need to be more aggressive trading this prospect capital because we are starting to
Yeah.
see it is very hard to break into that lineup. I mean, one of the top prospects in the system, Kobe Mayo, could not he was hitting otherworldly in AAA. Like it was like, when is this guy going to come up? And then Ryan O'Hearn's keeping him out. And no shots at Ryan O'Hearn. He has had a great season for Ryan O'Hearn, right? But
Right.
they're starting to run out of spots to fit these prospects, and they need to be one of these teams that starts to become more aggressive with their prospect capital.
Absolutely. Hyper quickly before we go to a break, which prospect is your honorable mention before we get to the top 10?
Ooh, an honorable mention that I really like. I know there's someone that you really like, so I'll let you all have him. I'm gonna go with Emilio Sanchez. Emilio Sanchez is one of they've been dipping into the IFA market a little bit. He's got a little bit of contact skills. The power is sort of up in the air, but I kind of like it. He's got everything else. He's a good defender at shortstop. He's got a good arm. He's a good runner. I think that there's potential for him to fill out and become a really interesting major league piece at some point for the Orioles or for another team in a trade.
Yeah. I think my honorable mention is going to be outfielder, not catcher, Creed Willems. It's an interesting bat. Don't think he's a catcher, but I think the bat could have the potential to carry him. But they're not top 10 guys. Who is? You're going to find out whenever we come back from our first break. We're breaking down 10, 9, 8, 7, and 6 in the Baltimore Orioles system when we get back to Path to the Show live on Bally and Stadium. See you soon.
Bally Live's MILB channel is where baseball's future lives. Visit ballylive.com or download the app today. Path to the Show keeps rolling all off-season. Tune into Bally Live and watch as we dissect every club's farm system and top prospects. From single to AAA, we've got you covered.
Welcome back to Path to the Show here on Valley Live and Stadium. We are the Prospects Live guys. I'm Reese, I'm not Drew, and I have Drew with me as well. We are going to be breaking down the 10 through 6 prospects in the Baltimore Orioles farm system. Starting with number 10, Juan Nunez. Juan Nunez they got him in a trade with Minnesota. He's got a live arm. It's a good fastball slider mix. He'll mix in a good changeup as well. We kind of bumped it as a 60, 86 to 88, and the only issue with him is command. What do you think about Juan Nunez?
I kind of like Nunez enough. He's got the 3-pitch mix. The command is a little iffy, but I think the fastball changeup is a good 1-2. I do think the key thing with me and Nunez is that I think if everything ticks right for him, if he gets some more solid development, I mean, we've only seen him in Class A advanced thus far in his career. Uh, Getting to be, he'll be 24 this upcoming season for the majority of, no, all of the season, excuse me. So, need to see a big year from Nunez. Everything needs to start ticking along to hit that kind of mid rotation upside for fantasy. I think that it's more likely we see him as either a multiple inning reliever or potentially Nunez could be one of those sorts whose stuff dials up in single inning stints. I mean, the fastball, like you said, pretty solid, good carry, sits in the mid 90s, but in one inning stints, maybe it could hit that 97 mile per hour a little bit more regularly, and he could be a little bit more of a late inning threat, right?
He could be a late inning threat. And I think, unfortunately for someone like him, we're hitting the point where we might have to start thinking about him as that one inning reliever. He has to be added to the 40 man. So ultimately, that sort of decides where he goes. I would take a chance on him in the Rule 5 draft because I think that the stuff's good enough. And with the Rule 5, I think that you should sort of be taking pitchers if you're a major league team because you can kind of pick and choose your spots with them a little bit better than a
Mm-hmm.
position player. So Juan Nunez is sort of getting to that not put up or shut up time, but I think it's time to start putting him in, think of him more cresting towards the reliever arc in his, prospect development. And I think he'll be really good back there. He'll be kind of like I don't know if he's a closer because I don't think the stuff is that crazy, but
Yeah.
it's like seventh or eighth. He's like the second or third best reliever in like a competitive team's bullpen. Maybe not a championship caliber bullpen, but a competitive team, like a team that makes a wild card. He could be the seventh or eighth inning guy.
Fits for the Orioles right now for sure. But
Yeah.
I think that at least from a fantasy perspective, this is a guy you can kind of safely monitor. I wouldn't rush to pick him up unless you're playing in one of our sicko mode leagues, which is of course leagues with like 750 or more prospects. And then in that case, I think the prospect of him being a Rule 5 selection is probably kind of interesting because then you can see, will the three pitch mix play up in that relief role? And in that case, in a sicko mode league, especially, he's kind of interesting.
He definitely is. It's that sort of like that sort of league. I just don't know anything outside of that. He's someone that you just kind of monitor and you just check in every once in a
Yeah.
while, check in every 6 weeks, see how he's doing. I think that they might protect him, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't know how that'll go. But someone who they don't have to protect for a long time, if you're looking for upside, Miguel Rodriguez is sort of that. He's a 2023 IFA. He's 18. He's made it to single A. I wrote his report, and I'm really impressed by the level of contact he shows at such a young age, and especially as a catcher. The power is sort of up in the air. I think that there's a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of like different parts of his game that could grow, and I think power is definitely one of those. I've listed him as a 40 power guy, which kind of means he'll hover in that 12 to 15 in his best years. It's a batted ball luck years. He could definitely hit 18, but I think there's a chance for more. There's a good defensive catcher in there. He can make good contact. He's got a good arm. He's kind of got the baseline skills to be a Kybert Ruiz, a shorter catcher, contact first, can play behind the dish, and is sort of just fine back there. I think he ultimately profiles better as a backup catcher than a starter, or like a good 1B, I guess, is also a good way to view him. I don't know what you think about him.
Well, Miguel Rodriguez has several things going for him with me. First of all, he's a catcher. I love catchers. Second, solid hit tool. Again, for an 18-year-old, great contact, line drive, spray across the field type hitter, which is really nice to see. Again, to be so young, already seeing some action at Class A, I think this could be, to quote Greg Hookemp, a bit of a diamond in the rough. I, the power is really the big question for Miguel Rodriguez because 5'11, 160, you'd think there's room there for a little more muscle, for that frame to be developed a little more, just with professional conditioning. I think that there could be a little more power. I'm curious what your take on what the realistic shot of more power being added is, because that's kind of going to dictate my level of fantasy usefulness that he could provide.
I think that there can be more power because when I watched him, when we write these reports, a little bit on how the sausage is made, so to say, I sit and I watch Ooh, a good 100 plate appearances. I try and get them as much as I can, and plus, as a catcher, it's really easy to scout them because you can kind of watch the pitcher, see how they interact with the pitcher. There's a lot of different things that you can watch on video, learning on these guys. And Miguel Rodriguez, he has a very small-ish frame for a catcher. Catchers they take a lot of bumps and bruises, as you and I know. They have to love it back there, and he is that. He is at least a bona fide catcher with a good 15 to 20 pounds of muscle. I think this is a guy who could hit 20 to 25 home runs. It's just, is he going to be that sort of guy? Is he going to tweak the bat path? Because right now it's fairly linear, but I do think that there is upside in an organization that's shown they can kind of optimize swings a little bit and, get the body more dialed in to be able to handle the rigors of catching. I think Miguel Rodriguez could be a big up arrow guy if we see, those best shape of his life sort of pictures that you start seeing at prospects around February, maybe late January when they all start to show up. So yeah, he's someone who I'm really in on.
If Rodriguez comes in looking svelte, looking fit, what is it, BSOHL type tweets, best shape of his life, I think, yeah, it's up arrows. But right now, good contact, a pure catcher type. If the power develops, you may want to run to the wire. But right now, I think, again, sicko mode leagues, pounce. Otherwise, watch and see. A definite watch list guy, though.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Big watch list guy. And speaking of big watch list guy, and also we're going from one catcher who's down at single A to one who's at the level above. And there's some questions on whether Ethan Anderson, their second round selection, who they gave, I think below slot. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but they gave him good money, so they obviously like what he brings. He is, how would you say, a really good hitter, like really good power. Like most guys that come out of Virginia, he can hit. He can hit for some power. I don't know if he can catch. That's the only question. I think you might have a better spotlight on that.
I do think, can he catch? I think we're going to need to see some reps professionally because it's the arm that most is there. I think if I can just quote Tyler Jennings, who, again, genius, says the receiving needs work, the blocking needs work. Tyler seems to project him moving to first base. The bat is really the calling card here. I do think that we, and when I say we, I mean fans of catchers, kind of the obsessives like myself, are going to lose Ethan Anderson from the ranks of catcher in the minor leagues. I don't think it's going to really be bothersome, though, because Anderson's bat is kind of the carrying tool. And that is to say, Reese, as you said a moment ago, Virginia typically doesn't have bad offensive players. The grades here, 50 hit, 50 power, very much a power-centric bat, switch hitter, physical, patient, rarely chases. But again, maybe another wrinkle that we're going to need to look at here, can he put the ball in the air more? Can he provide more lift? And like many, struggles with some fastballs elevated up in the zone. Reese, how do you feel about Anderson before we really kind of scope out his fantasy relevance for the moment?
He definitely does need to start lifting and pulling a little bit more. I think that there's obviously the baseline. He shows that he can hit the ball really hard. And the ultimate question, like you said, is can you lay off the high fastball, which is one of the hardest pitches to lay off in all of baseball because especially from some of these low slots that we're getting, these guys, the fastball just looks like it looks like it's in the zone, and then all of a sudden you watch it and you're like, oh no, this is not in the zone at all. And he needs to sort of lay off of those, and he had a propensity to chase those sort of fastballs. I do think that he's a little bit better than he's given credit for on the east-west sort of parts of the strike zone, but it's north-south that he likes to chase a little bit is when I watched him a little bit of the University of Virginia. And ultimately, there's a lot of pitchers, especially bullpens, who are built on the north-south, fastball up, breaking ball down. And if he can't lay off of those, I don't think the power, even if he does start to put the ball in play more, that he kind of he loses a little bit for me. Like, I just don't think if he can consistently do that, then there's a lot of issues here.
Yeah. The key thing, as we've kind of alluded to, is swing tweaks. Guys at home, if Anderson can make these tweaks, a little bit more loft, maybe not chasing the high fastball, I think that 8th on the Orioles list could be, and I said as much in his fantasy spin, it could be a paltry ranking in as little as 3 months into the 2025 season. I think that for FYPDs, Anderson is a great late round shout. I had him If I'm not mistaken, I'll try to find exactly where I had him. But I do think that it's safe to say Anderson would make for a fine pickup in leagues of like 600 prospects or more rostered. Had him at 75 on my version 4 rankings, which was at the end of October. I could probably stand to bump that up a little bit, honestly. There's some guys that I think I prefer Anderson to, but, you know, everything is kind of relative. And with those last round FYPDs, you take the guys you like. At least that's my recommendation for you guys at home.
I agree. Take the guys you like. Speaking of guys that I like, I don't know if I like him so much for fantasy, but Ethan Anderson probably really likes him because they're college teammates, and that's
Yeah.
Griff O'Farrell. They're college teammates. They're pro teammates. They kind of, they play. Griff O'Farrell. He was the PPI pick that they got for Gunnar Henderson, so it's looking like a good little, when you're rookie of the year and you get that PPI pick, that's really just helps out your team and everything like that. And I think it's something that teams should chase more. But that's a different
Mhm.
conversation for a different day. Griff O'Farrell, he can really hit, good contact. The power is very questionable, to put it nicely, but he's a good defender at shortstop. He's got an okay-ish arm, and he can run a little bit. I don't know what the fantasy upside for him is, but I think there's a high floor of a bench piece for him in real life.
Agreed. It's I feel like I use this analogy a lot, but it's relevant here. It's marble floors, elevated, high class. The floor is outstanding for O'Farrell. Consistency was really the name of his game in Virginia. I mean, a 3-year starter at shortstop and above average hit tool, and that related to 86% contact rate and sub 10% strikeout rates at the University of Virginia. Now, all that being said, consistent, good defense, great hit tool, above average, if not great hit tool. O'Farrell is not a showstopper type. He's not. There's not much sizzle to the steak. The speed, and again, you said he's a fine runner, and the speed he offers is really more instinctual and opportunity based as compared to like Chandler Simpson, who we talked about in the last episode, who is just an outright burner with kind of that innate knowledge of stealing bases and the wheels to go with it. O'Farrell is not that. He understands when to steal bases, but he doesn't have the raw talent that Simpson does, for instance. And also, he will never ever be confused with a slugger. You were talking earlier about Rodriguez, how he could back into 12 to 15 home runs. I think that is maybe a career high for O'Farrell that probably will never be reached, if I'm just being blunt. But a consistent hit tool in FYPDs, it's tons of safety, and I think O'Farrell is probably even more safe than Anderson to be a major league contributor, and thus should be taken earlier in FYPD drafts, and probably in any league where you've got 500 prospects. Griff O'Farrell should be in consideration.
He definitely should. I think there's just such a high floor with someone who can play shortstop. Like we just see these sort of guys stick around for a long time. I mean, Geraldo Perdomo, right? He just plays. Like it just 350 plate appearances.
Yeah.
That sort of guy plays. I wrote a bunch of reports today. So I think one thing I want to do before we wrap this up is I want to talk about Chase McDermott. He got a little cup of coffee, and the stuff's really good. Like there's never been any question on the stuff. Fastball's average is about 94 miles per hour. He's got a good slider, sweeper also. He's got a changeup. He's got a good curveball. He releases from a pretty standard like upper 3/4 arm slot. The command is just the ultimate issue. I mean, this is a guy who gets 7 feet of extension, so it almost feels like he's placing the ball right in front of the hitters. So I think he just needs to dial in the command a little bit. If he doesn't, then he sort of like vacillates between like high leverage reliever or like low efficiency 5-starter.
Beautifully said. I'm leaning more towards high of the higher end. I think for his outcome could be the late inning reliever because the command is just so iffy. But the major questions for McDermott are: one, will the strikeout stuff convey in longer stints in the major leagues? And two, what did his scapula stress injury? What does that mean for him going forward? Because again, the stuff is nice. It's a 3-pitch mix with average or if not above average pitches. The command's just a little iffy. I think the changeup needs to be kind of abandoned, but McDermott is kind of right on the doorstep. It's just a matter of what that role is eventually, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think basically if he's a reliever, he's going to be a nasty 8th inning guy. I don't think he's a closer on a great team. but he's definitely got the upside to be like the bridge to a bullpen, and I think that's sort of like the floor for him, with a chance to be like a five and dive sort of starter. Maybe he can ultimately turn it around and become like a Sean Manaea type towards but ultimately the five and dive is sort of what I'm expecting from him if he does remain a starter. If you have any more thoughts on him, you can get to them if you want, or
Yeah, just really quickly, I've got McDermott just kind of on the hopes or on the knowledge that he's kind of at the doorstep, the proximity within my top 200 prospects. But there are certainly guys below him in my rankings who I have higher opinions of, if that makes sense. Still a fine, probable major leaguer, just the role is certainly in question.
yeah, the role is certainly in question. But what's not certainly in question is we're going to be taking our second break here on Path to the Show. Coming up, we're going to break down our top five prospects in the Orioles system. Who will be number one? Stick around and find out.
Path to the Show keeps rolling all off-season. Tune into Bally Live and watch as we dissect every club's farm system and top prospects. From single to AAA, we've got you covered. Visit prospectslive.com for top prospects rankings, video, scouting reports, and live action write-ups. Join their Patreon and get exclusive insights to dominate your fantasy league.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Path to the Show on Bally Live and Stadium. We're the Prospects Live guys, and you made it back just in time for the top five prospects in the Baltimore Orioles system as chosen by the Prospects Live scouting staff. So Reese, we have talked about 10, 9, 8, 7, and 6, and now it is time to talk about the number 5 prospect in the Baltimore Orioles system. And for this one, we're going to leave it to Beavers. It's Dylan Beavers, the outfielder. Formerly a strong college player, and now what is he looking like as a major leaguer? What's the outlook for Dylan Beavers?
So Dylan Beavers really missed an opportunity to be an Oregon State Beaver, by the way. That would have been awesome. That would have sold a lot of jerseys, but he ended up going to Cal Berkeley. Dylan Beavers, I view him as the fourth outfielder, high-end bench piece, maybe. Ooh, the ceiling on these sort of guys, we kind of saw it in the postseason this year in Parker Meadows. Like guys who have questionable hit tools, but have every other tool. They can play center field, they can hit for power, they have a good arm, and they can run. If everything sort of comes together, that 6 week stretch of beautiful Parker Meadows can kind of be what we can dream on Dylan Beavers. Dylan Beavers is one of my favorites. He's right there on the doorstep. He's in AAA. He has to be added to the Rule 5 next year. I don't think it'll take that long. I think he probably gets either traded, as we talked about, they need to start trading for pitching, or I think that he also he has a chance to just sort of come up and be the fourth outfielder for this team. He's got a lot of, like I said, a lot of really interesting tools. He's athletic, power, speed. He's got everything. It's just the swing decisions are a little bit questionable. The swing's a little grooved. He struggles with high fastballs, but that seems to be a an emerging trend in the system, is that they have issues with the high fastball. But Dylan Beavers, he's got a pretty high-ish floor because he's pretty close to the major leagues.
Yeah, the trends in the Orioles system struggle with the high fastball and potentially a swing that, I don't really know how much more development we're going to get at AAA with Dylan Beavers, but, theoretically for some of these younger cats, there's been proven to be development for these guys with suspect hit tools in this organization. So Beavers probably honestly a bit of a success story in that regard in his own right. I love where you said he could be a fourth outfielder because that's kind of where I see him. But I know in your report you said maybe even a platoon role. I think that with several outfielders, and especially with the analytic era of baseball that we're living in, platooning is becoming more popular across teams. It's not just Tampa Bay Rays sort of shenanigans anymore. A lot of teams will do that kind of thing, especially with a fourth outfielder type. And with Beavers, from a fantasy perspective at least, that fourth outfield type is kind of intriguing because there is power, 55 power. There is speed, 55 run tool, according, again, to you guys' grades. I really think that Parker Meadows is a good upper level comp because, again, Beavers making it to the show feels very likely. With what team? I don't know. Is he ever going to carve out a long term starting role? I don't know. But I think that he could be interesting and thus fantasy valuable. And on that same note, Dylan Beavers was my number 192nd prospect in November. So again, leagues of 200 or more, Beavers needs to be rostered because he'll be a major league contributor.
Yeah, I definitely think he will be in some aspect. I almost wonder if he goes to another organization, if just the playing time, he could get 350 plate appearances on, let's say, in a Garrett Crochet White Sox. Like he could definitely be the center fielder for them pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's honestly a great shout. He could definitely be the starting center fielder for them.
Yeah.
But I'll
So
tell you another guy that we're looking at in terms of a potential outfield starter, again, if everything ticks right and if the development comes around, because we're talking about the Orioles' first round pick from the 2024 draft. It's Vance Honeycutt. And Reese, I know you're a big Honeycutt guy. I know that I have some reservations about Honeycutt. So, my first question to you, sir, is long term, is Vance going to be sweet like honey, or is he someone we're going to want to cut?
I think he's gonna be sweet like honey. I love Vance Honeycutt. I think I've made it very well known, especially in our own internal like discussions, that I think Vance Honeycutt has a chance to be a star. It's just the 99th percentile outcome. When you do the whole like graph and everything like that of what his outcomes are, they could be pretty drastic. He has everything. He is a supercharged Dylan Beavers, and that's why he got a 50 instead of a 45. He's the first 50 in the system, which means we think that he can be at the we kind of think in the middle projection he's a league average starter. He's got plus raw power. He's a really good defensive center fielder. I mean, during his time at UNC, like he was just robbing home runs left, right, and center. Like it seemed like there was a diving play every game. And maybe there's a little bit of like he relies on the flash a little bit more. But I think that as he develops as a professional, he'll learn to rely on the speed and rely like that we put as a double plus. Like shout out to Tyler, our draft lead. He kind of killed it with this report. He does acknowledge that there is a lot of issues with aggressive chase and aggressive chase in the zone. Like I think that's the big issue is if you can dial that back a little bit. This is the ultimate gamble by the Orioles because they're in a point where they need to start taking high upside swings. And I don't think there's a higher upside swing in the draft than what Vance Honeycutt provided them. Like he could be if the hit tool gets to be average, which we have it projected as a 40, which is below average, which kind of means he's going to hit 220, 230 in our own like scouting like lexicon. If he hits 240, I think this guy's a chance to be a legitimate star.
Yeah, I love what you have to say about Honeycutt because it is so positive and it's ticking again on that 99th percentile. I think that I called him in my FYPD reports a man of multitudes because I don't ever really completely know how to take Honeycutt. First and foremost, an absolute tool chest. I feel like whether it is again, like you said, the jaw dropping defense in center field, it's the incredible kind of just natural speed. It's very effortless speed with Honeycutt. Tyler said it though, the whiff, the chasing, he needs to lift the ball more. And while you're right that for the Orioles, he was a lottery ticket, a high upside type thing that they need to take these types of picks, I don't think it's fair to consider Honeycutt a lottery ticket in your FYPDs because, kind of as you alluded to, Reese, it's going to take catastrophic occurrence for him not to be a major league contributor. But now, at what level is still to be determined. I think 95th percentile outcome. And so that, again, you guys at home, if you're not sure what I'm saying, nearly everything ticks right for Honeycutt as he develops. We could be looking at something like prime Starling Marte, which, 20 home runs, 40 stolen bases, maybe plus in both of those categories. Definitely somebody you need to target in dynasty leagues. I really think this is a good player, but if the hit tool, if the hit tool does not come around, it could flame out very, very quickly. But much like things that flame out, a firework, for instance, he could also be very beautiful and provide a lot of entertainment, a lot of joy for people.
He very much could. He's very volatile, and I think like you talk about in like an FYPD, which for those that don't know, it's a first year player draft. It's like in dynasty leagues. It's all the guys that are just got drafted and everything like that. You kind of have to take him pretty highly, and it's a very
Mm-hmm.
risky profile. But I do think that it's the sort of profile that you should chase. I do think that it's a team. Obviously, the Orioles thought it was good enough to chase, so they gave him good money too. He like, $4 million. I just the more I think about it, these are the sorts of prospects I would love to be wrong. I'm okay being wrong on because they have so many other tools that allow them to contribute. I'd rather miss on this than miss on the hitability guy who doesn't hit enough, like the Keston Hiura's sort of types. Like I'd rather miss on Vance Honeycutt, who could fall backwards into being a Harrison Bader type of player.
Yeah. Well said. There are so many different. Again, if I can make this joke that I'll make 10,000 times and at least once per episode, he has so many paths to the show. There's so many different avenues that Honeycutt's skill set could play into major league relevance, and so I think that that's doubly interesting for a player with as much upside as Vance Honeycutt has. And again, he's a tool shed. There's tons of power, good power, tons of speed, I should say. Great in the outfield. Reese, I was so out on Honeycutt. I told myself that he was just so inconsistent through his college season that if he didn't impress me in his first game in Omaha in 2024, I was completely done. I was going to be for sure the lowest guy in industry on him. And what does he do but save the game in the ninth inning with a beautiful catch? And I was like, you got me. So anyway, Vance Honeycutt, our fourth prospect in the Orioles system. And from one dynamite college center field defender to another, we go to number 3, Enrique Bradfield Jr., hashtag anchor down Vandy boys. Reese, I'm curious, what's your take on Enrique Bradfield?
He is one of the fastest players in all of baseball already. Like even though he's only been a double A, he's got the crazy sort of speed that we sort of want to chase. If you watched him race Chandler Simpson, would you rather watch that than a Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight? That's what I would rather watch personally. I know we're recording this after that happened, but Enrique Bradfield Jr. is just smooth. Like he's like velvet, like velvetly smooth up there in center field. He is so good. There's such a high floor. The question is, what does the power grade out at the end of the day? Like, does he ever get to double digits? I don't think so, but when you steal 74 bases, pound good efficiency too, and hit 270 all the way up to double A, I think you have a very high floor. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition to Vance Honeycutt. Enrique Bradfield is floor, well, Vance with a pretty high-ish ceiling, where like the floor and the ceiling on Bradfield is kind of the same. Like there's not much room to maneuver, but it doesn't mean that he's not going to be a good big leaguer. And like he can kind of max out at maybe if he hits 8 home runs in a season, I think that's awesome. If he hits 10, this dude's a fantasy stud. Like I think, and he's like a really good major leaguer. The defense in center field is good enough that and the speed, I think he's just going to be a consistent pain in the behind for any team when he's on the bases.
Well said. I do have to call out though that I don't think Chandler Simpson and Enrique Bradfield is going to be your Tyson and Jake Paul fight. I think that would be like Kenny Lofton against either of them. Just the age discrepancy with Tyson and Paul, a sad deal. But this isn't path to the ring; it's path to the show. And Bradfield, again, like you said, the floor beautiful, so high, such a high likelihood major leaguer, and Reese, we said it with Simpson. It's almost the dream profile for your leadoff batter with Enrique Bradfield. He hits, he's patient enough to get on base, and then when he's on base, he does damage. I think that this is, again, a 40 plus steal type guy with a 270 average, and I think 10 home runs may not be as out of reach as you might, but I do think that we're both soundly in Bradfield's camp as kind of, again, that ideal leadoff batter. Very old school baseball type thing, but I think he can make it work in the modern game, don't you?
I do. I think that with the new rules in place, he can be an absolute menace on the base paths. Like pitchers won't know what to do. I mean, do you even bother throwing over? Just let him go take second base. Like at this point, like this is the sort of speed. When you compare him to Chandler Simpson, though, he does have a touch more power than Chandler Simpson has ever
Mm-hmm.
shown. So if we're just comparing
Absolutely.
the two of them, because they're both dynamic athletes, like level of athlete we don't normally see in baseball. So Enrique Bradfield Jr. is just, I think, just amazing, good leadoff hitter. Maybe on a championship team, like they probably have someone else that want to bat leadoff. Do the old school NL thing where he's the second leadoff, hits 9, amazing defense, allows you to impact the game. I can't get enough of Enrique Bradfield Jr. Like sign me up for any one of his defensive highlights.
Likewise, a web gym guy for sure will be Bradfield. In fantasy, again, a top 200 ish prospect for sure. Needs to be probably rostered anywhere that you have prospects, unless we're like hyper shallow, 2 or 3 per league or 2 or 3 per team in your league kind of thing. Uh, he will be better in your standard fair leagues, standard cats. I think when you start introducing things like slug or OPS, I think he could get a little shifty. The value may not be as strong, but again, stolen bases, this is a guy that can essentially win you or contend for a winning week unless the other team has Chandler Simpson. I think those two are interesting parallels that we'll watch for a very long time going forward. Speaking of interesting to watch and very long time going forward, Reese, we're going to talk about the number 2 prospect in the Orioles system. It is Coby Mayo. Mayo is, for lack of a better word, yoked. He is essentially built as you would want your garden variety professional wrestler to look. I say that with a smidgen of experience. Ask me about that later. But Mayo is a cat who, upon his first glimpse, his first cup of coffee in the big time, didn't really excel. And I'm curious, why do you think that is?
I just think it's so hard to hit major league pitching, especially when you go the jump from AAA to the highest level of baseball in major leagues is higher than it's ever been. And I just think it takes guys a little bit. Like we see, like use his organizational mate, right? Like Gunnar Henderson, he was kind of not great for his first full like season in the major leagues, and then the second half he sort of took off. And I don't think Coby Mayo was given the plate appearances to sort of figure it out. The Orioles were they were competing for the division, so they needed to allow people who were able to contribute and not strike out 47% of the time. They weren't afforded that opportunity. But he's going to be totally fine. I think he's their first baseman of the future, first baseman of the present. Hopefully, this is a guy who's got crazy bat speed. I mean, he technically doesn't qualify under Baseball Savant, but it's 74.1 miles per hour, and he's got a good launch angle. This dude is just going to hit for power. And I think he's a little bit better athlete than he's billed as. Probably slides over to first base, but he's someone who I just think is going to hit in the middle of this lineup in maybe a year or so.
Absolutely. I think that really no matter what with the contact rate, because we can criticize that, but he hits the ball so hard. Max exit velocity 115, 90th percentile is 107. Guy just hits the crap out of the ball. I think 2025 is a huge year for his value. I'd like to see him in Baltimore from the jump, but it's a 30 home run bat at peak, and we should see him pretty much immediately. I'll say from the jump. I would hope so. I don't know about maybe from the jump because he is the number 2 guy, and the number 1 guy, I have a lot of faith in being in Baltimore from day one, Reese, because the number 1 prospect in the Orioles system is catcher Samuel Basallo. And Reese, I'm really curious for this guy who is top 10 universal across the industry. What's your take on Basallo?
Basallo, he is top 10 in the industry because of his crazy raw power. He makes good swing decisions. I think I undersold him. I wrote his report. I wrote a 55, which kind of means that he'll hit 260 to 270. I think there's a chance that he hits from more than that in his best batted ball seasons. This dude, probably moves over to first base. He can catch a little bit, but this dude, he's got everything. If he could be an average catcher, I think that would basically make him the best prospect in baseball.
Yeah, even if not, I think at first base he's incredibly valuable. This summer in Arlington, Reese, I had the opportunity briefly to speak to Basallo and asked him if I could have an interview, just a moment of his time. As the clubhouse attendants are ushering all of the media out of the room, I kind of looked at him like, come on, man, give me a little something. And he looks at me and says, man, I really got to put my pants on. It's time for me to take BP. And so what I tell you that to say is that Samuel Basallo takes the game very seriously. A lot of people might have given a little something, but he's ultra focused, hyper intense about the game, cerebral, a mature hitter, my number 2 prospect in all of baseball, a top 120 player in Dynasty total, period. Reese, is there a prospect catcher that you prefer to Basallo, or is he your number 1 catcher in the minors?
Number 1 catcher in the minors.
I think that it's arguable he's the number 1 prospect in the minors. But we're going to talk and wrap up the system because as it might have been a little weak at the bottom, but the system got strong at the top. Mayo, Basallo, Bradfield, Honeycutt, etc. And when we get back to Path to the Show, we're going to wrap up this system. Baltimore, we're putting you to bed when we come back to Path to the Show on Valley Live and Stadium. Stay with us.
Visit prospectslive.com for top prospects rankings, video, scouting reports, and live action write-ups. Join their Patreon and get exclusive insights to dominate your fantasy league. Bally Live's MILB channel is where baseball's future lives. Visit ballylive.com or download the app today.
Welcome back to Path to the Show here on Bally Live and Stadium. We just sprinkled some Old Bay seasoning on the Baltimore Orioles farm system, and now I kind of want to discuss, who do you think of this 10 is in line for a promotion next year?
Great question. I think the most logical answer is going to be Kobe Mayo, just because he saw a little bit of action in the major leagues last year. I don't think he has anything left to prove in the minors. Mayo at this point is either your quintessential quad A guy or the outcome that I see as being more likely. He's just a little bit of a slow start to the majors, much like his future teammate Gunnar Henderson, and he's going to come out this year and look like the player that he has in AAA, with redonkulous 115 mile per hour exit velocities at max and 30 plus home runs. I think Mayo will have 300 plate appearances, if not more, in Baltimore in 2025. And I'm looking forward to seeing him.
I was going to say either he's definitely my pick for this as well, but my only question was, is that in Baltimore or is that for another organization in a possible trade?
Ooh.
But to differ a little bit, I'm going to go with Chase McDermott. He's kind of, depending on how he recovers from this injury, I don't know if you've seen any sort of timeline or anything like that, but I think the stuff's really, really good with him, and he could play out of the bullpen at some point or be the number 5 starter. Kind of just depends on how they feel about their roster construction. If they're okay with a less efficient 5 starter, then he perfectly fits into that rotation. Especially early on in the season, they can kind of pick and choose the spots with him because they don't need to go the 5-man rotation. Most teams don't in the beginning of the season. But the transition from that, which player in this system do you have the most faith in? I think it was a guy. I want to put out a prediction. I think it might be a guy who talked to you about pants, but I could be wrong.
Well, yes, it is, of course, Samuel Basallo and his commitment to not only his pants and having them on, but to the game of baseball. I can't say enough good about Samuel Basallo. Again, cerebral, patient, mature, a well-rounded player with plus tools across the board, minus speed, I guess, but really, who cares? And I want to make a point that is so critical with Basallo that I feel like people might get lost in the weeds with him a bit on. You may say things like, okay, well, he's not the catcher because Adley is, an otherworldly defender in many regards. That's fine. Basallo is not the type of player who you draft in fantasy, who you acquire in fantasy to fill a spot. He's the sort of player that you build your team around, period. This is a guy who, whether it's first, a utility spot, left field, I don't care. This is a player who, for all intents and purposes, you need to be acquiring because he is the number 2 prospect in baseball, if you ask this guy, and a top 10 guy universally. So ask your favorite prospect analyst, and they'll tell you that he's a top 10 guy as well. I don't think there's anything I could say to sell you off of Basallo because he's truly outstanding. This will be the season he breaks into Baltimore by hook or by crook, by trade or by whatever you want to call it. It's his year.
Yeah, I think Basallo would definitely be my bet, but I also I like to switch it up. So I'm gonna go with Enrique Bradfield Jr., good defensive center fielder, good contact skills. The power is still questionable, but if he hits 6 to 8 home runs in a season, I think we're okay because he's gonna be driving. He's gonna be driven in a bunch. He's gonna be a good run producer. He's gonna be an impact base runner. There's impact glove is there. So I just kind of want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Orioles Path to the Show. But I also, if there's any other predictions that you have, let me know. But I think we should. Oh, yeah,
I
so
think
basically, I think as far as this goes, who of the honorable mentions do you think has a chance to break into this list?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think going forward, I've always had a soft spot for Patrick Riley, a right-handed pitcher, but I think I really like your shout on Emilio Sanchez, but the guy that I really like is Creed Willems. I think if the bat takes some steps, this could be a guy we're talking about next year for Path to the Show, if we're so fortunate to do it. In kind of that 4 to 7 range, mid pack in the top 10, Creed Willems, I think he could realistically be that. What about you, Reese?
I think Aaron Estrada, he's like a really high hit tool, little bit of power sort of profile. I think if he hits that he can definitely sort of make his way and break into that sort of 6 to 10 range if we're so lucky to do this. And I just want to say, thank you to everybody. Thank you for tuning in to watch the Baltimore Orioles path to the show. We'll see you guys next time.
Bally Live's MILB channel is where baseball's future lives. Visit ballylive.com or download the app today.